society without a state, Islamic society existing without a state, which may be termed as a civil society of protest. Now, taking cue from Iqbal's reference to Ibn Khaldun, I think that looking at the Meccan example and also at the Abyssinian example, I think Islam saw the possibility of Islam living or Islamic society existing without having a state. That is why there are no clear instructions left by Prophet Muhammad in the Quran or in the Hadith about the successorship to the Prophet. And also, Islamic law books are do not have any clear chapters on the statecraft. The books written on statecraft were written separately, although they are part of Islamic law, but they are not regular books. And also, what is to be noted is that statecraft books often speak about precedents and some principles which they interpret to be basis of political theories, and also non-Islamic and pre-Islamic precedents come in. The important thing to note is that the pious people throughout Islamic history tried to move away from state, and in fact, in Indian Pakistani history, we have a term for these scholars who frequented groups. They were called ulama or the bad scholars. Although Muslim societies accepted state as a necessity for the realization of Islamic teachings, but very early in Islamic history, the ulama, the merchants, and the professionals found that their interests could be better protected if they found the society independent of state. George Makdisi has argued very convincingly that the lawyers, law schools, and legal education started developing in the 10th century as guilds. The events that prompted this development was the coercion of the Abbasi state to impose Mu'tazili theology, and later attacks of Hanbalis, Shi'is, and Asharis against each other. The legal institution that made guilds possible was that of waqf, trust property that was beyond the country's control of state laws. The institution of waqf was also supported the guilds of other trades and professions. One can see even now in the old cities of Muslims, old bazaars still being supported with waqfs and separate quarters for different traders. The trades still exist where you can find also madrasas, religious madrasas. Sufi orders were also organized like civil societies. They also had waqf institutions to support. These orders were often in the form of futuwa, chivalry, joined by soldiers who were professionals but were not on the payroll of the government. They practiced as qazis on the frontiers of Islam. The Sufi orders and soldiers often combined themselves in the institution of Rabad, the military outpost that later transformed into Sufi auspices. It is significant to note that most minorities in Muslim societies adopted trade as a profession, as the guilds provided them a strong civil society and their interests. Minorities were also acceptable to their counterparts in trade because they could easily transact between Muslim and non-Muslim frontiers. That is the type of general view of Islamic history. Now, I have also explored the theoretical aspect of civil society, looking at the Islamic law, because Islamic law is the main expression of Islamic knowledge and also the Islamic inspirations. Looking at Islamic law, I find 6 important indications that support my idea that civil society or the idea of civil society or the concept of civil society existed. existed throughout Muslim societies, and not only in politics but also in social settings. Even today, as the paper before me has discussed, that some of the problems raised in Islamic law still are very important, even for people living in societies. The second indicator, or the second view that we can find in Islamic law, is the division of duties, or the farz, into farz ain and farz kifaya, that is individual duty and societal duties. It is important to note that the imama, or the political leadership, or the religious leadership, qaza, the judgeship, ifta, interpretation of law, all these are treated as societal duties. Just to give you one example, that in India during the British period, the matrimonial cases in Islamic law requiring judicial separation raised a problem, that there were no Muslim judges available, and the Hanafi jurists in India insisted that judicial separation can be enforced only by the Muslim judges. Hence, there were different alternatives that were proposed. Mufti Kafayatullah, one of the jurists, he suggested that if there is no Muslim judge, even a Muslim judge appointed by the Britishers or non-Muslims would be acceptable, but in case there is no Muslim judge available, the Muslim community should select from among themselves someone who would function as a judge in their disputes. He should preferably a person knowledgeable about Islamic law. It was not necessity, but what he insisted was that any person, however learned he could be, he could not take up that position unless the community selected him for that function. The third idea in Islamic law is that of contract. We find this idea of contract very important and almost penetrating various transactions, starting like marriage contract, which is not a sacrament but a type of contract between individuals, and in trade, in economics and politics, we have all this relationship between individuals and relationship between individual institutions are framed to the model of contract. Let me also add here that in political theories, the selection of the caliph is made by a body, or idea of a body, who are called Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd, the people of contract. And then after the Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd had decided and they had made their oath of allegiance, the other people joined in this oath of allegiance, which was called bay'ah, again a form of a reference to the contract. Now here, let me emphasize also here from the theoretical point of view again, that in Muslim society, dissent with the state or the caliph, the ruler, was allowed. An individual or a group of people can oppose or rebel against the ruler, provided they can justify their revolt on the Islamic legal basis. That means that it's like idea of contract there. The fourth idea that we find in Islamic law and Islamic teachings is what is known as Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar, the duty to enjoin good and to prohibit evil. Now, this is a societal duty, and it has been enjoined in the Quran and in the Hadith. Referred to it that there are three levels of this Amr bil Ma'ruf prescribed in the Hadith. That is, first by hand, that is by force. Secondly, by tongue, that is preaching, persuasion, protest, verbal or written. And thirdly, by heart, that is aversion to evil, withdrawal, contemplation, self-criticism. Islamic law makes it clear that by force or by hand would be allowed only if the Islamic State is existing, that is jihad would not be allowed, is not sanctioned by Islamic law unless it is declared by an Imam. What is important here is that the duty of Amr bil Maruf or the enjoining good is considered individual as well as societal on the whole society. But the scholars do emphasize that the idea by the word ma'ruf and by munkar is that they should be accepted values, not that any individual who considers something good or something bad, he should start his preaching or he should start condemning others. Albert Hourani recently surveying the conception of Muslim society, modern Muslim thinkers, he refers to Mufti Muhammad Abdul Tahtawi and others and says that even today, in their thinking, the idea of Amr bil Ma'ruf is one of the significant features of Muslim society. The fifth term in the Islamic law that is important here is the individual right to ijtihad, that is exercise of his independent opinion in the Islamic law. Now, of course, there are conditions and there are restrictions who can perform ijtihad in which areas, but what is important is that in ijtihad, very soon a distinction was developed, and that is the division of legal subject matter into ibadat and muamalat. The ibadat are the rituals, and muamalat are other areas. The restriction was, the division was to say that the immutability applies only to ibadat, the rituals, but the muamalat will be adopted, and human reason, human experience will be applicable in case of legal reasoning about muamalat. Now, coming to modern society, the rule of law, the framework of legal contracts, separation of muamalat from revelation, and the role of human reason by the exercise of ijtihad to bring about social change, organization of societal duties as far as kifaya, and the principle of Amr bil Ma'ruf all contributed to the formation of an idea of Islamic society and saved Muslim society from disintegrating under non-Muslim colonial rule and its assertion after the independence from this rule. Interest in the studies of civil society in the Muslim world that Turner studied and to what we have referred about focused on the contrastive aspects of Oriental and Occidental society. It was a continuation of the idea that capitalism was the highest goal to achieve. The Western sociologists have argued that because of absence of spirit of capitalism in the Muslim middle class, trade in most Muslim societies was dominated by minorities, and that the absence of entrepreneurial spirit and achievement motivation is linked to the underdeveloped nature of the middle class in Islam. In fact, the fact that the Muslim societies developed such spirit after their independence called for a revision of such generalizations. Sensing this need, in 1991, recently there was a New York University began a project, Civil Society in the Middle East. The experts in the field criticized it and said there was the justification for such studies. For instance, Ernest Kellner commented that Muslim societies manifest at most a feeble yearning for civil society. Their common view was to presume that there is very little society in the Middle East, but studies that carried out A.R. Norton, on summarizing these studies, he observes that in Lebanon, destroyed by infights between the militia, civil society of trade and professional unions resisted and kept Lebanon from representing. In Kuwait, during the Iraqi occupation, the civil society of cooperatives continued functioning. The local Divaniyat provided resistance. In Jordan, during the Gulf crisis, professional associations resisted destabilization of the country. In Tunis, Association of Senior Clubs, University Teachers Association, and mosques served as civil society. Now, speaking of the South Asian Muslim society, to my knowledge, there is no study of society. There would be come up during the discussion, and I'll be grateful if it is pointed out. I will briefly look at the Muslim society in South Asia, especially with reference to Pakistan, and my general view is that the characteristic of the Muslim society in the pre-British India was that it was based on a division of Ashraf and others. The Ashraf lived on state. The study of civil society there would be during the discussion, and I'll get I will briefly look at the Muslim society in South Asia, especially with reference to Pakistan. And my general view is that the characteristic of Muslim society in the pre-British India was that it was based on a division of Ashraf and others. The Ashraf lived on state land grants, and the others lived by their labor. The Ashraf or Umara were not the owners of the land. They were given these lands as in various forms, in Jifta, Badan Maash, or Waqi grants, but the state owned the land. The institution of Waqf also existed, and it also supported some of the Ashraf families. Not only Ashraf families, but also some Sufi orders, teachers, and students. Just to judge what kind of Muslim society there was at the advent of the British colonialism, I analyzed the book Fatawa Azizia by Shah Abdul Aziz, who died in 1854. Fatawa Azizia is a collection of responses that Shah Abdul Aziz gave to the discussion about Islamic law. In general, my impression is that throughout these fatawa, there is little concern for the political changes or the political order that was pertaining. Of course, there are questions about Darul Harb and Darul Islam, that is the enemy territory, the Islamic territory, but it is significant to note that the questions whether India is Darul Harb are aimed at two things. Those people who are asking these questions, they are asking whether it is allowed to take interest from Muslims and from non-Muslims, or can we discontinue right in here. The political aspect, or the whether we should wage war against the colonialists who have come, is immaterial to the question, to the inquirers. Let me add here also that this whole discussion is taking place in a context where Darul Harb means where non-Islamic laws or non-Muslim laws would be implemented. William Hunter, who studied this problem, he suggested to the British government that we should seek some fatawa and declare India Darul Harb, because that would facilitate implementation of English laws in India, and Muslims would have no resistance, because the framework Shah Abdul Aziz himself is concerned, he never allowed interest. He insisted on the continuation of Friday prayers. He allowed employment with the British government, and he gave a lengthy fatwa in which he explained that the question was that there is a hadith that whoever died without knowing the Imam of his time or the leader of his time, he died as a dragon. Shah Abdul Aziz explained that it means that Imam of the time, the leader of the time, refers to the Prophet Muhammad, and after Prophet Muhammad, this is the book of God, the Quran, which becomes the leader. So, what I gather from it is that the idea existed that a Muslim society could exist without a state. Now, trying on Professor Dr. Muhammad's analysis, the two changes that the British liberal, the British government, brought to the Indian society was one of the permanent settlement system, in which those people who were holding land as tax farmers, they were given the ownership rights. Second change that was introduced was that the dispute settlement was monopolized by government, and hence all this ifta, jawal, panchayat or local systems of dispute settlements were a type of decrease in importance. Now, one thing that I should note here is that during the British period also, in Muslim society, the general indifference to state existed. And one indicator of this is that later, when after continuous attempts, Muslim ulama were brought into politics and they organized themselves as a political party and their madrasas and all that, even then they could not assume the role of leadership. They joined the secular party, either with the Indian National Congress or with Muslim League, to lead the struggle of independence. Another point that I made was that looking at the data of the number of registered trade unions and various associations and societies of independence, and comparing it with Middle Eastern countries, I strongly feel that in Pakistan there are more civil societies, or there are indicators of civil society more stronger and wider in Pakistan than in Middle Eastern countries. I need not go into those details. To conclude my presentation, I will say that notion of civil society is not alien to Muslim society. Civil society existed. In the modern problematic of the seminar, what I fear is that in my understanding of the Islamic theory society, that there is more emphasis on society than on individual. The interests of the society as a whole take priority over individual, while the civil society as defined in recent studies makes more emphasis on the role of the individual. Now, whether that is a problem in the sense that Muslim society is inherently incapable of building a democratic society with that lesser emphasis on the individual, I think that is the question to be confronted.
Masud has raised important issues with respect to the nature of civil society in Muslim communities. We shall have opportunity to question all these issues. Now I request Ms. Gramsci to kindly make her presentation.
I have a few general comments regarding this forum for presentation, because the presentation is linked to these comments. One is, of course, that the absence almost of women in the forum, in terms not only of being participants, but in fact speaking on issues. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that the two of us who have spoken here have been, to my mind, relegated to society, family, and the role of women. I personally don't think that this is a women's issue, and I don't see why I should be actually speaking on it. By and large, as we've seen in the last 2 days, the whole issue is the question of male discourse. And to the extent that men have defined society and men have defined the role of women within it, I feel that even this, as an institution of control, should have been discussed by the men here. I feel quite equipped to have taken on the state or the economy or various other things with which I have a background. I think only the fact of my gender or my sex has pushed me into this particular category. The second is that I found the discussion so far utterly in some sort of not just a level of abstraction, but into some sort of futuristic area. I mean, we've heard, for instance, that there has been no ideal Muslim state, we should struggle towards it. We've also heard yesterday that there's no such thing as a free market economy, which Arshad told us about. To that extent, of course, there has been no communist state, no socialist state, so we are all, in fact, talking about some idealized future. I find this very difficult if we're not, in fact, considering the past and considering the present. And I have no problem with abstraction. I find it philosophically very exciting, but I do think that abstraction has to be based on and connected to empirical reality. And I think that has been particularly absent in the discussion. To that extent, I think Rale's paper is, in fact, the only one that is talking about something more tangible and more real and something that we need to be discussing. In terms of the structure of my presentation, I do have some generalizations. I'm not, in fact, going to be talking very much about the family and women. I have some reflections on the note and the reasons why the notes that came regarding this meeting. And to my mind, perhaps there's a need to explore some of the basic assumptions that underlie us getting together at this point. And I feel that unless these are thrown out and we reflect on these, that dialogue and synthesis that we were talking about, or that the paper, in fact, the note talks about, would not be possible. One of the main problems I have with this, and actually the way I'm structuring this, is that some of them are comments on as I said, the underlying assumptions of this meeting. I will then go into some of the empirical work that I've been doing in the context of Pakistan, and perhaps end with a few comments on women. The problem initially that I had is that we got to know, and I was under the impression until last week, in fact, that we were talking about Islam and secular society. I was a bit amazed when I got this program last week, that it had been changed to Islam and modernity. I don't understand, and I don't know why it is assumed that the two are synonymous. I don't personally think so. And while I was going to reflect a bit initially on Christianity, but I think that yesterday's presentation, Dr. McGill, actually highlighted part of it, and he did locate it within Christian tradition or Christian history. But where I do disagree, and which is the crux of part of my argument, is that all religions are actually very contradictory and ambivalent. And it's very difficult to on the one hand, generalize for them, but on the other hand, it does allow various interpretations and various ways of looking at it. And while I agree with yesterday's presentation, I would say that was only half the picture. The other half, where particularly you were arguing that Jesus of Nazareth said that you couldn't serve two masters, the other side of the coin is that Jesus also said that render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render unto God that which is God. There is inherent in that a separation of religion from the state. So I am suggesting that you will find both in any religion. In this case, I was just reflecting on Christianity. But what Christianity does say, and is that both Caesar and God are to be obeyed and served. These contradictions and the ambivalence is much more connected, and the aspect I know about it is in the monotheistic faiths, and I find that they're very much the same, and stem in fact from the same source, that is in the monotheistic tradition. Islam, since it is a culmination in a way, or Muslims would argue that it is a culmination of this tradition, it imbibes and internalizes a lot of what did exist in the other two faiths. And I find the only difference, perhaps, is that it has codified a lot of the areas which have been suggested in some cases in the others, at least in the source book, in the Bible. And I don't want to necessarily go into the Judeo-Christian and Islamic tradition, but I will, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but there are traditions within it and similarities that one perhaps should keep in mind when we try and posit the two together. I actually have a problem seeing them as very separate and very different. One, of course, is the oneness of God, the male God, and actually the same God in all three. There is a separation of good and evil, God as opposed to Satan, and in difference to the polytheistic faiths, which will have reflections of this God. They are also, and this in fact brings us to, and perhaps would influence our discussion on what is being perceived as modernity, which is essentially capitalism, that all three are really trading commercial, came to trading commercial cultures, and did reflect then, and did internalize a lot of these realities. There was a response to these. And I think that the discussion yesterday on riba and usury, etc., comes from the fact that the reason why these religions address themselves to this problem is because the situation actually existed. Otherwise, we may not have got an actual reflection on them. All three are also not only recognize the existence of property, but in fact speak to the issue. And again, Islam really codifies this in actually regulating how property will be conducted and in fact how it will be inherited. But the notion of property is not just implied in all three, but is addressed in all three. I am particularly concerned, and I will talk about the women in that sense, that when it comes down to women as property, which is also what these religions are saying, this becomes an essential problem. Coming back to the note, I think that Islam in that was pitted, it was posited against something called the Western world. And I quote some of them, it was the Western world and Western secular and Western culture, etc.